Let's talk some green jobs today. What exactly is a green job? Well, I can tell you one thing. It's a political buzzword that has many people talking. That's why we are going to discuss a new report from Working Nation. We're going to talk to the editor-in-chief of this nonprofit organization. Ramona Schindelheim is our guest. She's someone who has worked both coasts, from Chicago, has worked there as well. And we're going to look at a report mostly around countries or states along the Mississippi River, but then we're going to talk jobs across the country and what exactly does a green job. We're going to get heavy into the economy a little bit today. I know we were supposed to talk more green jobs, but this is an illustration of just how some of these jobs are so intertwined. Futures of communities, both rural and urban, how that's all tied together when it comes to environmental or a green job. And it might mean something a little different than what you think. This is the MTOM podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. Glad to have you here. If you have a question for me, feedback for me, paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. That is my email, and this is our podcast discussion. Ramona, I have to say, you're the first person I think I've interviewed on this podcast in all these years that has an award that I know it is. The Emmy behind there. Congratulations. Tell me quickly. I went through all the awards before we started rolling. Tell me how you won the Emmy.
The one that's behind me, I won for Best Newscast in Los Angeles. I was producing the 10 o'clock newscast here and for 5 years. And my favorite part of all of this, though, is I moved to New York and they had to ship it to me. I didn't even know about it. It was like, hey, you won. I said, oh, send it to me, please. Yeah, because it was very exciting. It was my first one. So it was for producing.
And you're like a super Big Ten fan now, because from Chicago, you've worked in New York, now in LA, so you just can't escape the Midwest.
I love the Midwest. I grew up outside of Chicago. I'm proud child of 2 Arkansans who were farmers. So I'm really big. I really understand the ag business from that sense. Don't ask me too many details, but I do understand how important it is to the economy and up and down the Mississippi. So I'm a big fan. And then Chicago, I always said I lived as far west as I could go before I hit corn. So.
Well, they know a lot about, there's always the long time thing in agriculture is whatever happens in Chicago, but really with algorithmic trading anymore, that's not the
Right.
case. It's changed a little bit. You can't, I mean, you've heard the story, I'm guessing, of, when the farmers want to influence those in Chicago, they would, if it had been super dry or they needed to rain, they'd artificially rain on the ceiling. Oh, it's raining up above, and the price would go up or something,
Yeah, those days I think have changed a little
Yeah.
bit, but I did grow up listening or getting up, WGN, the superstation in Chicago. I grew up every morning watching the ag report. So it was still a really big part.
We have an analyst on the show that always talks about Tom Skilling, and what Tom Skilling says still
Yeah.
goes. And
I
there's a
agree.
lot of truth to that.
Yeah, he's a legend.
So one more thing on the family side. So Arkansas, you said, is where the family came from. What were they farming down there?
They were cotton farmers. They were both sharecroppers. They were, both of them in the northeast near Jonesboro and Paragould. If you're familiar, about 50 miles from Memphis. And they sharecropped until they were in their 30s. And then they moved to Illinois. And my dad started working in a factory and my mom became a waitress because, they wanted to do something else and raised 6 kids there. And that's where I grew up. So.
Okay. Well, that's okay. And it's good to have those roots. We don't get that far off the farm with many people. I mean, it is kind of even in Iowa, we have people that are a generation and soon it'll be 2. And you're not removed from journalism. Do you still call your job at Working Nation as a journalist?
Yeah, we are a nonprofit news organization. And our focus is very much on workforce development. It's on how to get people into family-sustaining jobs. So I say after all the decades that I've worked as a journalist, I'm finally an advocacy journalist, I guess. We try to be impartial. We don't take a political point of view or a policy point of view, but we tell stories about pathways for people, whether it's community college or training programs, apprenticeships, We look at it from all angles. So from the government, what they're doing, what colleges, post-secondary education people are doing, nonprofits and businesses, which is very important on how they're creating their own pathway to workers.
I like to just in the sense of full disclosure, you are nonprofit, but where'd the majority of the funding come that started you?
Yeah, we have our founder and CEO, Art Bilger. He put the seed money in 8 years ago. He started the program, started the initiative, and it started with a few videos telling stories about some programs. And we, over the last 5 years, we really developed it into a full-fledged news operation where we tell stories. I speak at conferences. My colleagues speak at conferences. We partner with big conferences in workforce development and education. And to answer the question on where the funding comes from, Art still, picks up the bill to some extent, but over the course of the 5 years, we've created partnerships where, like the PBS model, which you would be familiar with, where you find some philanthropic organization that believes in the stories that you're telling, and then they give you money and you have editorial control. But as I like to say, never partner with anybody. I don't support their viewpoint. I'm not going to take money from somebody who says everybody should be making under minimum wage. We want to find people who want to support stories about, getting a pathway to a good job. And so we've gotten money over the years from Lumina Foundation, which you may be familiar with. They do a lot of funding on K through 12 and higher.
Mhm.
JP Morgan Chase has funded stuff, Comcast, NBC, the Clint Eastwood Family Foundation every year gives us a matching grant to tell stories about veterans and work. So our money comes in from a lot of different organizations, and then we just partner with some like-minded groups to seek other funding as well.
Ramona, you worked in New York. You covered Wall Street, familiar with business. Where would you say your business education as a reporter came from?
Yeah, I say this as a journalist. Nobody is born being a business journalist. Nobody's born being any kind
No
of
one
journalist.
aspires in Northwestern or Mizzou to be a business
Not I.
journalist?
I
Because
was
I
I was
wasn't.
I was at DePaul University and I was studying writing. That is, just what I wanted to be. But I started working at WBBM Radio and learned to love news. And um, my business journalism, though, I was working in New York. I worked at a show called Live at 5. I was producing, which David Letterman made famous over the years by just going in and interrupting their newscast, which was so funny. And so I ended up inheriting the show and producing it. And my boss went over to CNBC and he said, "Hey, come over. I would love you. You're a good storyteller. Can come over and help me tell business stories better?" And I was like going, I don't know anything about business. I know what the opening bell is, or the closing bell and that. And he said, it's not that hard to learn. And I went over there in 97 and it took me a little bit, but I understood. But what I've always felt is that the market is not the economy and it's not people's lives. So while I enjoyed telling stories about the businesses out there and what they were doing, I like the story about their impact as opposed to the stock price. And I produced Power Lunch over at CNBC, and I always said, don't put an analyst. I don't want to book an analyst. Get me the CEO so I can ask him, what is he doing? What's he making? What services is he providing? And how does it impact me? And that's always kind of been my philosophy. It's really, and now doing this at WorkingNation, it's really back to this whole idea of how do you make sure people have a job that gives them a sense of dignity, it provides for them and their family, and it's something that maybe they enjoy.
So I use the reference, you kind of reiterated part of my question of the market, some think is the economy, but it's not. The same can be said about the price of crude oil is the same as gas prices when it comes to energy. How
Okay.
is it? And we just did a recent episode here on the MTOM. If you get a chance to go back and listen to the Jay Young episode, those who are listening this week, that was an oil and gas explorer, and we talked about how the two are not the same. But in your roles of covering business, how do you explain to the people that, hey, crude oil is not what you're paying at the pump. It's part of it.
It's part of it, but yes, but it's so much more. And I have, so when I went over to ABC from CNBC, my job was to be that business reporter, business producer, editor who kind of made the connection between the real world and the business world, and made a point of breaking down, like, your price is up at the pump. And I still remember when I was first there, I think gas was like at a record, $1.25 a gallon or something, and now look at it, right? But I would always make a point of saying, you've got to break it down. You have to understand it. It's like, I will use this analogy. It's like the unemployment number. That is not a full picture of the employment. It's just the percentage of people who are looking for work who haven't found it yet. So if you don't look for it, you're not counted in there. If you have 3 jobs, you're not counted in there. I always say you have to look at the underlying elements of something, because the world is complex. It's not that simple. It's not, oh, crude oil, it's up and there's my gas is up. So to tell that story, I have always advocated to, really breaking down the pieces and go through the pathway and try to make it easy enough for people to understand who might not have that experience, or I don't want to say education in the terms of, I'm not saying we're talking down to people, but we don't all know everything.
Right.
Yeah.
About whether it's our money, I should know everything. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's a misnomer. And I have a reason for my progression. My third part of this then is, when I read the Market to Market Twitter feed and I look at what people say, and I read my own Twitter feed and I see folks say, well, by golly, Biden's green jobs plan, just think if we had that, it would make this price worse or better or whatever it is. Again, it's not that simple.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not that simple. We we have been doing this series since January called Green Jobs Now, and we've been looking state by state, mostly up and down the Mississippi right now, because that was the grant that we got from the Walton Family Foundation. They said, do what you want, tell whatever stories you want, but we would love it to be in the Mississippi River region. And then we had an outlier or two, Pennsylvania and Colorado. So we were looking at what's going on in the state. So where you say it's not that simple, it's not. Pennsylvania has been a coal state. Colorado has been a state that's been in the, like advancing renewable energy for 10 plus years through Democratic and Republican governors. They have renewable energy is just something they have embraced. A state like Louisiana is now looking at blue ammonia and green hydrogen and trying to convert their plants from coal burning, fossil fuel burning to cleaner energy. Well, that creates a whole new thing. Like, how do you capture the carbon and how do you store it? So it's very complex depending on what state you are in, what your resources are, what your history has been, what your workforce history has been, how you're educating people. So to kind of say, oh, let's just do it, and this is going to change everything, you have to have an infrastructure, hard infrastructure, employment infrastructure in place. So if you come up with a way to create jobs, you have people to fill them. So again, I am of the belief from everything I've read that there are a lot of people in our country who really, really, really want clean environment, whether it's for recreation or work or just society in general, depending on the state you're in, right? And it will create jobs, but they may be jobs that you don't expect. So they're not all going to be wind turbine technicians. We can't all do that job. We don't need 50 million wind turbine technicians. They're going to be jobs that are green peripheral. They're going to be a green architect, someone who's going to be designing a building that is going to be energy efficient. They're going to be a plumber who is really all about making your water in your home clean and it energy or it efficient as well. If you have a leak, it's gonna cost you more money to pay for your water. So you could be a plumber, you could be an architect, you can be a solar panel installer. We've come across some just really interesting jobs in all of these, but I guess I'm kind of rambling a little bit to say it is not simple either, just like what we talked about the oil and gas markets.
Well, in the green, I mean, the whole reason we even came together was you were talking about green jobs. So maybe we should just define it. What is a green job?
Ah, that's really a hard one. We have brought in researchers, people who have spent their lives looking at what the green economy is, what the green jobs are. There's an organization called MISSI, which has been around for decades, and their whole research model is looking at what makes a green job state by state. We brought in MC Burning Glass, now known as Lightcast. They just changed their name, and they look at labor markets. So the two of them together have pulled together some definitions for us. So maybe a simple way to put it is a direct green job is something like the uh, wind turbine technician, is somebody like the solar panel repair person. But a indirect or a green adjacent job is someone like that architect who you need to have some skills to understand what you need to do, but you're not really you're not creating the product or the service that is really directed to fixing the environment. There's no one definition, and we kind of make that a point when we started telling the story. I wrote an article about the green economy right now, according to Missy, who did this big report for us, a white paper. They, right now it's about 6% of the economy. There's about the number, I have it right here on a piece of paper, 9 million jobs. Yeah, let me say, let's see, yeah, 9 million jobs, which is about 6% of the economy, right? They're forecasting, based on this kind of broader definition, that there's going to be 24 million jobs by 2030, and that'll be about 14% of the economy. As more and more people start talking about it, as more and more people start going, hey, I would like my HVAC guy to, think about, how can I protect the environment myself personally, and making sure I don't spend more money on electricity. Again, comes down to money, right? So
It does, but it also comes down to what happens locally. I can think of those in Texas or Oklahoma who say we sure have a lot of jobs that support the oil industry on a derrick, on an Explorer, on things like that. There's not that many wind turbines that need repairing like there are oil derricks. So why would I want to support something that's going to eventually take a job from me and money from my state?
Well, interesting that you should bring up Texas. We are right now in the process of doing our research on Texas. And what we found so far is the Houston area, which has, all the, refineries, the pathways to Galveston, and all the other, part of the supply chain in that industry, they are talking about how they're greening. They are talking about it. And I like to dissuade people of the notion that this eliminates jobs. It changes jobs. You're still going to need that person that knows how to, operate the plant. That's going to, maybe some of the skills they have are going to change a little bit, but they're still going to have to do it. I mean, again, I've been a journalist for a long time. I never would have imagined when I started that I'd be sitting here talking to you over the internet, and you're going to sit there and cut the video yourself. I do a podcast. I cut the audio myself for it. I operate the machinery. I had to learn different skills. I didn't lose my job. It just evolved. And that is what our beginning research, and we're talking to the business leaders, the industry leaders in Texas. That's what they're telling us, though, is that they are making that shift, but they want to make sure there are jobs. I think it was Illinois, one of the I states that you spend a lot of time in too. They are working with labor leaders to make sure that those nuclear power plants that they have there, those people don't lose their jobs, that they continue to work, but they have to learn some new skills. But we have all learned on the job. That's how we learn. It's not, okay, you don't know how to do this, let's get rid of you. It's like, what can I do to help you so you can keep your job? And that's what they're doing in Illinois with AFL-CIO.
And there's efficiencies that come in all of these fields, agriculture specific. Go back to thinking to your sharecropper roots. And that's now some of that job is taken by an implement. Maybe it's one that's green or one that's red,
Mhm.
like it is behind me here.
Yep.
That technology has changed the amount. I mean, it's changed rural America just in the amount of people that are employed by agriculture, even as
Yeah.
agriculture has a bigger share of the economy because its value is higher because of the efficiencies that it's done. The same can be said.
Yep.
Let's go back to Texas again. Um, there is a little bit. You've covered spin from certain groups or messaging that happens from different groups. Look at the energy companies and how they've changed. They're no longer called oil companies. They're
Yep.
energy companies, and look closely at what some of their new jobs are. It's not about finding a new place to put a hole in the ground. It's a new place to put a solar panel or a wind turbine or whatever it is that we're going to do green to find energy in a hot, sunny spot like the Permian Basin or something.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the part of the evolution. And you brought up, now there's a machine maybe that, you know, you can fly a drone to the back 40. You don't have to take your tractor out there anymore. You can pick up a soil sample. So technology and production has changed in nearly every field you can think of. And it's not a question of saying, oh, well, you're just going to have to learn it and do it. But it's a question of the businesses want to change, and there, I don't know if you know about this, but there is a draft SEC rule for publicly traded companies that with the emphasis now on equity, sustainability, there's a rule that says in the annual reports and in the earnings reports that companies that are publicly traded are going to have to reveal you know information about how their products, their services are not harming the environment, what they're doing to be green, how they're getting their employees to work toward that goal. There's a lot of talk that's going to become a permanent rule. So that means a company in Texas that's publicly traded is going to have to reveal that, and because it's considered what is that, material to the
Mm.
financial. So if I'm a shareholder, I can make a decision. Do I want to still be a part of this? I think that's going to drive companies to want to be greener as well.
Does some of that, uh, I guess I'll call it nuance of policy, is that driven politically or is that a market driven force right now?
I think it's both, really. I mean, I worked at CNBC for a total of 9 years, and I saw enough annual reports and earnings quarterly reports to know that shareholders have impact on a company, and if there are enough people in the country who feel a certain way, they may be very loud shareholders who come in and say, this is what I want you to do. We very much stay out of the politics. I mean, I totally can point you in the direction of people who know all about the politics and how that is influencing it. I see it more as a market driven kind of force. If I think my company is going to do better if I am greener, maybe because my shareholders are going to like it, my stock price is going to go up because they see it's a popular belief. Yeah, I would say, yes, that makes sense to me. That's what's going to happen. You know,
Do do does it get to be though political? Does green jobs, one party controls the messaging and another party supporters criticize, "Oh, thanks Biden for this."
I, well, again, we stay out of the politics, but I do see that there is a division in language. Like what, you know, um, there's some people don't like certain words like sustainability or climate change or global warming, and you can throw a whole bunch of words out there that one party likes and one doesn't, right? We try very hard to talk about this in a way that it's about the underlying economy. And again, that's our goal in this. There are plenty of people who have political goals on either side, and I let them speak for themselves. Ours is about, are there jobs here? And are they going to be jobs that really can make you support your family?
I'll go back to your CNBC Power Lunch discussion with the analyst. When you see an analysis or an analyst talk about a certain type of the economy and the way jobs are going, they look at things and just say, hold the brakes, let's let the market work itself out. The market will decide. Do you think that the market is going to decide on a green economy more than policy is going to decide?
That's a good question. I would say, in my own personal view, not that of WorkingNation, I think the market is going to decide. I think and you already said this, which is important. These are local markets, right? So if you look at a company, even if it's a big company like Entergy or Dow Chemical, or who's in Tulsa, McKee, I think it is. So these are energy companies that support local workers. They need the local workers to have their business. So it's going to be a balance between, got to make sure they have those jobs because we need them if we're going to stay in business. And also, I don't think they want to pollute their own communities, right? I would say in Tulsa, I've been to Tulsa. I've done a couple of stories about Tulsa. Beautiful community, very beautiful community, wide open spaces and blue skies, right? And lovely. And I think people want that. They want, like I talked about, Louisiana, people want in Mississippi, they want to be able to go fishing. They want to go hunting. They want to go hiking. They want to enjoy their community. So there's a lot of people out there who may not support, I mean, Mississippi is a red state, but they support a clean environment, clean water. So they may be pushing people in a different way. It's not about politics so much, about lifestyle. So I think in the end, we're all going to be that, go in that direction. But I think it's important, again, talking about employment, talking about education to get you to the jobs that you need. That's where businesses have to come in. If they want to change the way they do business, they got to help build that pipeline, so to speak, of workers.
Do you think that in the research that you've been able to do, not going to make you stick your neck out again, personally versus professionally, but does it still, though, come down to dollars and cents for people in any market? Because they still see, I mean, in Iowa, in Illinois, in Indiana, in a corn state, we talk a lot about ethanol and what ethanol has done to reduce the price at the pump. And then you get outside of the Corn Belt, and that discussion is, well, ethanol is terrible because it takes so much water, or it does this much carbon
Yeah.
pollution. And it's again back to local areas defending themselves. In the end of the day, yes, it's market driven. It's still, though, I don't want to pay more at the gas pump than I have to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't want to pay more. I live in California, and I actually saw near the airport like $8 a gallon about 3 or 4 months ago, which was insane. And of course they're gouging close to the airport because you got to return your
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 rental.
rental car, right? But I yeah, I think it is going to come down to dollars and cents again. Why we put our focus so heavily on what does this mean for a job? Because if you get paid well, you know, you get paid so you can support your family, that gas pump price is not going to hit you as hard as if you're making under minimum wage. And yeah, I think it's going to come down to dollars and cents. And also, if you think about it, I think any new technology always, or new way of doing something, always is more expensive at the beginning. and
Mm.
and then it always kind of works its way out to, you know, gosh, I remember how much my HD TV was. The
And,
first one I bought 10 years ago.
and then during the pandemic, you saw all the sales, and now there's going to be even more sales because we ordered a whole lot of TVs that are sitting in
Yep.
warehouses. On a green job, is it going to be national decisions that are made that influence the most creation of jobs, or is it going to be a local? And I'll go back again to the
Mhm.
I-state discussion. Ethanol is a big employer. In Iowa, we have a whole lot of wind turbines. We don't have as much solar, but solar is coming along quickly in many of the
Mhm.
same farm states that don't have the wind turbines. Is the biggest change in the green economy going to come in local, regional approaches or a national approach?
I think it's gonna be local. I think everything ends up being local. You mentioned in Iowa that you have, the wind turbine. I think right now, because and this is another thing that I had seen, that 13, not no, excuse me, let me get that the qualification right here, but it was, I believe, from what we talked to the people in Iowa, is that your state is number one in energy produced by wind turbines. And that was a pretty shocking number to me. I didn't expect it. I thought it would be in the Great Plains, but I didn't think it was Iowa. But you have, that is where your most of your energy is coming from right now, or number one in the country. And over the next couple of years, I think that's going to happen. That's supposed to grow from the numbers and research we saw. So that's where your growth is going to be. Here in California, drive from LA to Las Vegas, and you see all this area out, all this land out there that's really pretty barren, and you see solar panels everywhere. So a lot of the solar energy could come from these places that people actually don't want to put a house, and you can't farm. It's just mountainous area, with certain little valley areas, but there's a lot of solar. So yes, that's going to happen here. Texas, they're like I said, their oil industry is talking about how they're revamping it and how they want to create more jobs with a greener factory. So where, and along the Mississippi, there's a organization. It's like the Mississippi Cities and Towns um, collective or coalition.
Mhm.
And I spoke to one of the mayors of, who's the vice chairman of that, and he lives in Mississippi. Water. That is their whole thing, is how do we make sure this water is cleaner? So this is where we get most of our drinking water. And it's also a shipping channel. It's a commerce channel. So how do we make sure the water is cleaner? So they're talking about what jobs can be created to do just that. So again, where do you live? It's going to change. It's going to change your perspective, your focus, and it's that way. I think with all jobs really.
I think 15 years ago, I had a boss who said that he thought energy policy was going to be you work with what's best in your area. If
Yep.
it's solar in the desert, you're going to do solar. If the wind blows in the plains, you run the turbines. If it's oil, you run oil. Ethanol doesn't work on a national scale
Yeah.
like some of the other energies do, but it works really good where you're growing it.
So and here's, I'll ask you a question. In Iowa, so how much ethanol do you guys create? I mean, what is the percentage? Because I don't know that number.
We always think about there's a generality when you look at a field of corn in Iowa that it's kind of split into thirds. It's split into a third for animal production, a third for food production, and then a third for renewable energy. And it's pretty even amongst the three. And if I'm quoting those things incorrectly, I apologize, but that's the overized general statement. And we ship, ethanol plants do dot some areas, and they've had some good times. They've also had some bad times, and we just had E15 is going to be available year round. That's just normally been a certain time of year, and there's pushback on Iowa-based convenience stores
Mhm.
about putting in new pumps, let alone those that aren't based here. So there is a pushback on that oil side of things to the renewable side of the equation. So again, it's always about market share. But At
Yeah.
the end of the day, if I go to that gas station that starts with a K or a C and I buy more ethanol than not, eventually they're going to put more ethanol options out
Well,
there.
and okay, I again, my reporter and me asking you, and how many people does ethanol production employ in the state? Is it a big portion of the employment?
No, it's not a big portion if you don't count the farmer who produces it. And even then, you can't even contribute it. But I mean, I'm thinking we have ethanol plants. I can't even tell you the number across the state. If it's below 20, and it might be more, it's not like one per county. But what the ethanol plant has done in terms of jobs, it has created its own economy. I'll use my home farm, for example, in northeastern Iowa. Uh, our renter, when John looks at options, he has 6 miles to one town and the co op, and the ethanol plant 12 miles from the farm is going to maybe call and offer a nickel to a dime higher per bushel on corn,
Hmm.
or he can go to Cedar Rapids, which is 45 minutes the other way, pay for a little more shipping, but yet that company is still offering more money. So he has seen his price
Yeah.
go up just because ethanol has made it's I, the best way to say it is it's kept everybody honest in the
Mhm.
sense of it's created a market because it's a demand, because the ethanol plant will call and say, John, hey, we need 10,000 bushels. Can you sell? Are you wanting to sell today? We're offering you this. Let me get back to you. Calls the co-op, which is closer. I'll give you 8 cents per bushel more. Well, he doesn't have to pay as much to ship it there. And so he figures out. So in that sense, that's not, I don't know how that's ever measured
Mhm.
in any study
I
that you do.
But that's fascinating, and it kind of goes to the point of what you and I were talking about, which is what's going on in your community. And obviously ethanol has been embraced by some people because they're using the corn to create it, and you know but who can pay for it, whether who's gonna, is it cheaper for people to buy at the pump, and all of those questions are going to come into play.
Well, and I'll go back to what the field of corn is used in feeding the animal. One of the biggest one of the biggest products of ethanol is a byproduct. Corn comes in, it's, what's done to it is done for the ethanol or for the fuel. Then there's this dried distiller's grain that comes out at the end, and that is an incredibly efficient use of the grain in the livestock industry. So what I have an uncle that tells me over and over again about, well, DDG is really more valuable than the ethanol. But they're both valuable when it comes
Yeah,
to
that's
those who
great.
are trying
I
to
love
sell
the
the market.
efficiency. Yeah.
Well, it's like anything. You find a use for everything. And I want to go
Yeah.
back to something you had said back at not too many minutes ago, but it was about efficiencies. And pre-COVID, do you remember, and I assume it was happening nationwide, but there was this push from the Targets and the Walmarts of the world to go to self-grocery store checkout. You
Yeah.
remember how that was going? Then the
Yeah.
pandemic hits, and taking jobs away is where I'm going with this statement.
Yeah.
There was this, oh, we're taking all these people who have jobs as clerks at Target or Walmart. Oh, we're hurting their job, and they're not an opportunity. Now, fast forward through the middle of the pandemic when they was like, we don't have enough people to work in the stores. Just think if we wouldn't have had that push for efficiencies and self-checkout. I mean, that's a story for, I think, lots of industry that are probably going to look at. It's not so bad. Just give it a
Yeah.
try.
Well, yeah, I think I remember talking, this is pre-pandemic, a plant in Indianapolis. I was in Indianapolis for a couple of stories, and the plant, I think it might have been like a Frito-Lay's plant. I can't be 100% certain now, but I was talking to this woman, and she was telling me that they used to have like three people boxing Frito-Lays at the end of the equipment belt, right? It was, tedious work, opening the box, putting in the Frito-Lay, the bags, and then closing it. They decided to get rid of it and made it mechanical, so they automated it. But what they ended up doing is they hired 5 people for those three to repair the robots because they kept breaking down. And so there's technology, efficiencies, productivity, and we've seen it. It's not new. We've seen this historically. I've seen headlines
Mm.
from the turn of the
Mhm.
century, you know you know, factory building cars, when they started, Ford starts putting them on the assembly line. But automotive industry became the biggest industry, manufacturing in our country for a long time. Um, Now it's mostly overseas, right? But there was a time my dad, did a brief stint in an auto factory. But my point of it is it creates jobs too. Some of this productivity and efficiency creates jobs. The repairing and programming a robot paid better than boxing, putting Fritos in a box. So there's a balance somewhere, I think. Not everybody wants to learn how to program. Not everybody wants to, learn how to repair a robot. But there are some changes and opportunities. So I hear what you're saying. So those people lost their job as cashiers. That's horrible, terrible, terrible. And hopefully they kept them on and figured out what else they could do and how to make them learn, how to teach them that. I will use one example somebody told me is, think about it now. I've been a store clerk in my life. I learned how to use a cash register that was electric and the whole thing. But now they want you to have handheld equipment so you can keep track of inventory as well. There's some skills to learn how to do that. So, can you take people who lose these jobs at the end of the cycle and train them and give them jobs that are better paying? This kind of goes back to my philosophy, or our philosophy is we want people to have family sustaining jobs. So I don't know if, just checking somebody out at a grocery store is going to give you everything you need. You might have to have two jobs.
Well, and that's that. I think it was something you had mentioned when we discussed the unemployment report. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting there. You look at what
Yeah.
were the quits this week? What were who's removed themselves from the workforce, who aren't looking for jobs anymore? Yes, 372,000 jobs are created. What kind of jobs were they?
Yeah.
And that
Absolutely.
and that's always, it's a matter of what the market. I mean, and maybe the worker, we still don't know. We'll know in a couple more years once the research is all done of, did the worker actually win in the pandemic and getting
Yeah.
more money per hour? We don't know whether that's regular jobs or green jobs or any jobs in general. Ramona, let's
Yeah.
close with this.
Yep.
What do you think are going to be 3, 4 of the hottest, most sought after green jobs? Is that anything your research has been able to tell you? Like, you've
Mm.
mentioned some. Is there one specific area that looks like it might be a little more profitable?
Um, no, I think again, I think what our reporting and our research is showing is that green skills are more of the way maybe you should talk about something as opposed to just a green job. So having a skill that it can be identified as green because it somehow, saves the amount of water being used, or makes the energy more efficient, or gets rid of carbon emissions. So some kind of skills, no matter what job it lands you in, are going to be more valuable than anything. So it's just keeping your eyes open
Mhm.
for opportunities. And not all companies advertise saying this is a green job or this is a green skill. It's just kind of understanding what can be used toward that goal. I think that's going to be valuable. Again, this is research, this is forecasting based on some people that we very much trust in that space, who don't have a political agenda. They're very much about um, workforce, like how to make a strong workforce. So when they say that by 2030, 14% of the jobs are going to require green skills, I I'd start looking.
I would absolutely be
Yeah,
ahead of that curve.
yeah,
So,
yep.
all right, Ramona, thank you so very much for the time and the insight and the discussion.
Hey, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for giving me the time.
My thanks to Ramona for that discussion. Appreciate it. If you want to go back and look at other episodes, that's always an option. Subscribe every Tuesday, new episode comes out. We'll see you next time.